She walked into that elevator, small, tired, invisible, and the world was ready to shame her one more time. But then, a stranger stepped in, a man with grief in his eyes, strength in his voice, and a fortune he never bragged about. He said one sentence that silenced every cruel whisper around her. Yes, she's my fiancée. One lie, one moment of mercy, and somehow, the beginning of a love story neither of them thought they deserved. Stay with this story. It may remind you how hope finds us when we stop looking. Linda felt the elevator walls closing in as her supervisor's voice sharpened behind her. The fluorescent lights above flickered, washing everyone in a tired gray glow. And for a moment, she wondered if the building was sighing with her. She clutched the thin stack of outreach reports to her chest, wishing she could fold herself into the pages the way she used to fold handwritten notes in high school, small enough for no one to see. Linda, we need to talk about the numbers from last quarter, Marcia said, her heels clicking too loudly on the elevator floor. Your department is already on the bubble. If we can't justify the grants, Linda kept her eyes trained on the glowing panel of floor numbers. She could feel the eyes of two co-workers drifting toward her. She hated that feeling, the weight of being discussed instead of addressed. 19 years in community work, and somehow she still felt like the girl picked last for gym class. The elevator lurched slightly as it slowed for the next floor. The thick knot in her throat tightened. Not here, not in front of everyone. Her phone buzzed in her hand, not a real notification, just a reflexive gesture she made to escape tension. Before she could think twice, she lifted it to her ear. Hey, honey, I'm here, she said softly. Forcing a smile she didn't feel, her voice sounded too bright, like sunlight forced through a dirty window. The two co-workers exchanged glances. Marcia paused mid-sentence. Linda swallowed hard. She had no plan, only the desperate instinct to save face. The lie spilled out with a strange ease, as if her tired heart had been waiting for a moment to pretend it had someone to lean on. Yes, yes. I'll be home soon, she murmured, hoping her voice masked the tremor. The elevator dinged, the doors slid open, and standing there was the last person she expected to see, Daniel Reeves. He wore a charcoal suit like it was part of him, not a choice well-fitted but unshowy, with a quiet confidence that seemed out of place in Cleveland's aging non-profit building. At 47, he had the calm presence of someone who carried responsibility the way others carried their briefcases. She had seen him only twice in board meetings, once discussing new community housing initiatives, another time offering condolences to a grieving staff member with unusual sincerity, but she had never spoken to him. His eyes flicked to hers, steady, observant, soft in a way that startled her. He must have heard everything. She felt heat rush up her neck. Marcia stepped forward, lowering her voice. Mr. Reeves, good morning. We were just... He didn't look at Marcia. He looked at Linda. Not with confusion, not with amusement, with clarity. Sorry I'm late, Daniel said gently, stepping into the elevator beside her. I've been trying to reach you. Linda's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around her phone. She could feel 3 sets of eyes widening. Daniel lowered his voice, speaking to her, but loud enough for the others to hear. You said to meet you here. Right. She couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. The lie she'd whispered into the phone only seconds earlier now hung between them like a trembling wire. His expression didn't change. If anything, he softened. Then, with a calmness that didn't match her racing pulse, he said, She's with me. The air shifted. Marcia blinked. One coworker pretended to study the overhead light. Another looked like he might swallow his coffee cup whole. Linda felt as if the floor dropped another inch beneath her feet. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her heart hammered so loudly she wondered if the elevator itself could hear it. Daniel stepped a little closer, not invading, not assuming, just enough to shield her from the circle of curious stares. We'll finish the conversation later, he said to Marcia, his tone polite but immovable. Marcia cleared her throat. Of course. I didn't realize you two. We try to keep things private, Daniel replied smoothly. Linda nearly choked. Private 2. The words didn't fit, but they wrapped around her like a borrowed coat too large, but warm. No one spoke for the next few seconds. She felt the elevator resume its slow climb, humming through the silence. She didn't dare look up. She didn't know whether to thank him or run out at the next floor and never return. Her hands trembled slightly against the reports she held. She hoped he didn't notice, but she sensed he did. Daniel seemed like the kind of man who noticed small things, especially things people tried to hide. When the elevator reached the foundation floor, Daniel waited until the doors partially closed behind the others before he turned to her. "You look like you needed an out," he said softly. Her throat tightened. "You didn't have to do that." He nodded once. "I know." The quiet hum of the elevator filled the space between them. She felt exposed, grateful, humiliated, and strangely safe. It was a confusing mix for a woman who had spent years navigating challenges alone. Only when the doors opened again on a lower floor did he give her a small, respectful nod and step out. She stayed inside, watching the doors slide shut behind him. His calm voice lingered in her ears. "She's with me?" She wasn't. She knew that. And yet, for a brief moment, the words felt like shelter. But why would a man like him, wealthy, respected, composed, step into a stranger's lies so effortlessly? And why did it leave her wanting to hide and hold on at the same time? The house was too quiet now. Even the refrigerator hum felt loud, a steady vibration filling the small kitchen as Linda set her keys on the counter. She stood there for a moment, waiting for the familiar rustle of her son's footsteps or the sound of a TV left running in the living room. But the silence wrapped around her like an old coat, thin in some places, heavy in others. She slipped out of her work shoes and walked toward the dining table. A single lamp glowed in the corner, the warm bulb casting a soft circle of light over one plate, one fork, and a cloth napkin she had folded out of habit more than necessity. She hadn't eaten dinner with someone else in months, not since her son, Drew, left for his freshman year at Ohio State. He had promised to visit more often, but college life had its own gravity, pulling him farther each week. Her phone buzzed on the table. She reached for it quickly, a small lift rising in her chest. "Hey, Mom!" Drew's voice came through, bright, winded, like he was walking across campus. "I've only got a second, just wanted to check in." She smiled, even if he couldn't see it. "I'm glad you called. How's your week going?" "Good. Busy. Midterms already." "Oh, and hang on. Yeah? Dude, I'm coming. Sorry, Mom, I'm heading to a study thing." The call was ending before she could think of anything meaningful to say. "That's okay," she whispered. "Do well on your midterms." He'd already hung up. She stared at the phone screen as it dimmed, reflecting a faint outline of her face. The distance between them wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in new priorities, new friends, new beginnings she had once prayed he would find. Growing up meant pulling away. She had prepared herself for that. Or she thought she had. She pushed the phone aside and walked to the sink, letting water run over her palms until the coolness steadied her. The day had stretched her thin, first the supervisor, then the lie, then that unexpected rescue from a man who seemed carved out of another world entirely. Daniel Reeves. She didn't understand why he had stepped in. She barely understood why she had lied in the first place. Her eyes drifted to the hallway leading to her bedroom, the hardwood creaking as she walked. Old pictures lined the wall, Drew as a toddler covered in finger paint. Drew playing baseball at 8. Drew standing beside her at his high school graduation, her smile bright but tired. They were snapshots of a life that had been full, even when it was difficult, but some parts of that life were better left behind. As she entered the bedroom, she saw the framed photo on her dresser turn face down, an old habit she hadn't undone. Her ex-husband's smile stared at the wood through the glass. She didn't need to see it to remember the way he used to talk to her. "You overthink everything. You're too soft. You don't know how the real world works." Years of small criticisms had worn her down until her voice had grown quiet, then nearly inaudible. When the divorce came, she hadn't fought it. She had simply picked up the pieces and carried them with her, unsure what to build from them next. She changed into a loose sweatshirt and sat on the edge of the bed. The room felt larger now, emptier. She used to imagine she'd travel or take up painting once Drew left for college, but the reality of living alone after so many years felt more like adjusting to a missing limb. Everything required relearning. She reached for her laptop on the nightstand, intending to distract herself with emails. Most were work reminders or automated messages, but one subject line froze her breath: invitation from the Reeves Foundation office. Requesting a brief meeting, her hand hovered over the trackpad. A meeting with him, her stomach tightened. She replayed the elevator scene in her mind, the lie, the panic, the ring of surprise in her coworker's eyes, and then his voice stepping into the mess to shield her. "She's with me?" She didn't know whether the message was about courtesy, concern, or damage control. Daniel Reeves wasn't known for frivolous interactions. People described him as steady, methodical, compassionate, but firm. Board chairs didn't call meetings over harmless misunderstandings. If anything, they avoided unnecessary entanglements. Maybe he regretted stepping in. Maybe Marcia had reported something. Maybe he wanted to make sure she wouldn't misuse his gesture. Her heart drummed louder with each possibility. She stood and walked back to the kitchen, needing movement to quiet her thoughts. She poured a small glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring out the window. The evening sky had turned a pale blue-gray, the kind that settled softly over Lakewood's tree-lined streets. A couple walked their dog beneath a street lamp, their silhouettes drifting past her window like a scene from a distant life. Linda pressed the rim of the glass against her lip, letting the cold anchor her. She wasn't used to being noticed, let alone defended. The weight of someone stepping in, especially someone of his stature, felt unfamiliar, almost unreal. And yet, underneath her shame was a quieter truth for a moment in that elevator. She hadn't felt alone. She shut her eyes, hearing the echo of his calm voice. "You looked like you needed an out." She had, more deeply than he knew. The email notification pulsed again on her laptop across the room, its soft glow reflecting faintly against the wall. She didn't move toward it yet. She stood in the stillness of her kitchen, feeling the pressure of the day settle into her shoulders. If she accepted the meeting, she risked reopening the embarrassment she wanted to bury. If she ignored it, she risked misunderstanding and maybe losing the one moment of dignity she'd had all week. She set the empty glass on the counter and exhaled slowly. The refrigerator hummed again, steady and low, as though waiting with her. She knew she had to reply, but was she walking into a correction or the start of something she couldn't yet name? Linda stood outside the restaurant, rain pooling around her shoes, wondering if she should run. The awning above her clicked softly as droplets struck the metal, the sound steady and rhythmic, like a quiet urging to breathe. Warm light spilled from the bistro's windows, casting a soft glow onto the wet sidewalk. Inside, shadows of diners moved slowly across the pane, calm and unhurried. Everything about the place felt intimate in a way that made her chest tighten. She pulled her coat a little closer, unsure if the shiver running through her came from the rain or from the idea of sitting across from a man she barely knew, one who had stepped into her life with unexpected certainty. When she finally pushed the door open, a wave of warmth greeted her. The bistro smelled of roasted garlic and baked bread, a comfort she hadn't realized she missed until now. The wood-paneled walls muted the conversations around her, creating a cocoon of soft murmurs and clinking silverware. Daniel stood from a small corner table as soon as he saw her. His presence seemed to settle the room rather than dominate it. He gave her a gentle smile, no pressure, no expectation, as if he understood how much courage it had taken for her to walk through the door. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, pulling out the chair across from his. His voice held the same calm steadiness she remembered from the elevator. She tried to return the smile, but her nerves pulled the expression thin. "I wasn't sure I should come." "I know." He sat again, folding his hands lightly on the table. I appreciate that you did. A server approached quietly, placing 2 menus down and asking for their drink order. Linda requested water. Daniel did as well. After the server walked away, the quiet between them grew thicker, not awkward, but expectant, like a pause before something delicate. I suppose you're wondering why I reached out, he said. That crossed my mind, she admitted, fingers brushing the condensation beginning to form on her glass. Daniel nodded, as if choosing his words carefully. I've been in enough meetings to recognize the look of someone being cornered. You didn't deserve that pressure. Her cheeks warmed. She looked down. I shouldn't have lied. Maybe, he said gently. But I've seen worse lies told for far worse reasons. Yours looked more like self-preservation. The kindness in his tone unsettled her. She wasn't used to someone offering insight instead of judgment. She lifted her gaze, studying the lines around his eyes, lines carved not by age alone, but by experience. He took a slow breath. I didn't step in to embarrass you or complicate your day. I just didn't want to watch someone be pushed down when they were already struggling to stay upright. She swallowed. You don't even know me. No. He agreed softly. But I've known people who were treated the same way. The server returned with their waters, giving Linda a moment to gather herself. When they were alone again, Daniel leaned back slightly, a small gesture that gave her space. There's something else, he said. Something I think we should talk about directly. Her pulse jumped. She nodded for him to continue. There's been word of budget cuts at your organization. People talk. His tone wasn't gossipy, simply factual. I know your supervisor has been lobbying hard for certain changes, and that she's been pushing you. Linda stiffened. It's not that simple, she murmured. Most things aren't, he said, which is why I want to propose something mutually helpful. Her chest tightened. Daniel. He lifted a hand, gentle but firm. I'm not asking anything inappropriate, or anything that would affect your dignity. I want that to be clear. She nodded, though her heart was still climbing into her throat. My presence today complicated things, he continued, more than I intended. That's on me. And given the circumstances, appearances matter right now more than they should. She clasped her hands together. Appearances. He exhaled slowly. Your supervisor seems to think she can pressure you without consequence. If she believes you have external support or influence she can't control, she may think twice. Linda stared at him. Are you suggesting we pretend to be... Her words trailed off, too embarrassed to complete the thought. Not partners, he said. Not romantically. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. Relief and confusion washed together in her chest. But a temporary public connection. He continued, professional, friendly, enough to discourage her from making you the target of her frustrations until the budget decisions settle. She let out a small, startled laugh. Daniel? This sounds insane. Maybe it is. The corners of his mouth lifted, but sometimes the simple solutions are harder on the people with the least power. I'd rather not watch that happen. Her emotions tangled in a knot, gratitude, embarrassment, suspicion, curiosity. She didn't know how to respond to a man offering help without expecting something in return. What do you gain from this? She asked. The question hung between them. His expression shifted, something heavier crossing his features. He looked down at the table for a moment. 8 years ago, I lost my wife, he said quietly. I haven't remarried, haven't even tried. People assume things: loneliness, vulnerability, whatever story makes sense to them. Sometimes it helps to redirect those assumptions. Linda felt the air in her lungs thicken. She hadn't expected that. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't interrupt. I thought, he continued, that maybe we could help each other through a situation that neither of us chose. She stared at her water glass, watching a droplet slide down the side. She felt the room blur slightly, not visually, but emotionally. She had come expecting a correction, maybe even a reprimand. Instead, she found herself sitting across from a man offering not pity, but partnership, on terms that felt strangely respectful. Her voice came out soft. I don't know. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, he said, just your consideration. His patience unsettled her more than pressure would have. She'd spent years being rushed, judged, talked over. His calmness left her unprotected in a way she didn't know how to navigate. She lifted her gaze to meet his. I'll think about it. Daniel nodded as if he'd expected nothing more. No victory in his eyes, no urgency, just that steady warmth again. The kind that made her wonder what kind of man offered help so quietly. But as they sat in the soft glow of the bistro lights, a quiet question stirred in her chest, refusing to settle. What did he truly gain from stepping into her lie? The thrift store dress was still in its plastic bag. Linda stared at it as if it were a decision hanging from the closet door. The muted blue fabric looked gentle, almost apologetic, the kind of dress that tried not to draw attention. She had bought it last year for a work dinner that ended up being canceled. Tonight, it felt like the only thing she owned that wasn't either too old or too worn to be taken seriously. She reached for the bag but stopped halfway, her fingers hovering close enough to feel the cool plastic. A restless energy filled her bedroom, stretching from the pile of folded laundry on the chair to the unmade bed she hadn't touched since morning. She paced once, twice, then sat on the edge of the mattress, clasping her hands in front of her. The conversation with Daniel replayed in her mind the warmth of the bistro, the calmness of his voice, the careful way he had offered help without stepping over her boundaries. She appreciated it deeply. But the idea of accepting anything from someone like him made her stomach twist. The imbalance felt too large, too risky. She didn't want to become a story people told behind her back. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sudden sound made her flinch. She reached over and picked it up, seeing her sister's name flash across the screen. She answered, trying to steady her voice. Hey, Claire. You sound out of breath, Claire said. Long day. That's one way to put it. Claire laughed softly. Tell me about it. How's work? Still the same circus. Linda hesitated. Her sister had always been the confident one, the one who seemed to glide through every problem with a mix of sarcasm and steel. Growing up, Linda had leaned on her, only to feel overshadowed at times. Tonight, she didn't want to feel small. It got complicated today, Linda said. What happened? Marcia cornered me again, Linda admitted, rubbing her forehead. It just pushed something in me. I pretended to answer a call, said it was a fiancé. Oh, Linda. Claire sighed. Why would you? I panicked, Linda said quickly. I just needed her to stop talking down to me. Her sister was quiet for a moment. You've always been too gentle. People take advantage of that. The words carried the familiar sting of truth. Linda swallowed. I know, but a fiancé. Claire asked, half amused, half worried. That's a big lie. Yes, and it got bigger. How? There was someone outside the elevator, Linda said. He heard me, and he went along with it. A beat. Then Claire's voice sharpened. Who? Why would someone do that? Linda exhaled slowly. Daniel Reeves. There was a pause long enough that Linda wondered if the call had dropped. The Daniel Reeves, her sister finally asked. The foundation chair. The guy who donated $1 million to the shelter downtown last year. That's the one? What on earth is going on? He said he recognized the look of someone being cornered, and he made an offer. Linda felt her throat tighten again. He thinks that a temporary public connection between us might help keep Marcia off my back until the budget decisions are over. Her sister let out a low whistle. That's a lot. I know. And what do you get out of it? Maybe a little breathing room at work, Linda said. Maybe a chance not to be pushed out. And what does he get? Claire's tone sharpened with suspicion. I don't know, Linda whispered. Maybe just a way to redirect the rumors that follow him. Her sister's voice softened. Linda, be careful. Men with that kind of influence don't always realize the weight they carry. Even good ones. I know, Linda repeated. Though the truth was, she didn't know anything. She felt like she was walking through a fog. Whatever you decide, Claire said. Just make sure it's your choice, not something you're doing because you think you don't have options. Linda closed her eyes. Her sister meant well, but the words pressed against old insecurities she thought she had buried. After they hung up, the house fell into its familiar quiet again. The lamp on her dresser cast a gentle yellow glow onto the walls, softening the edges of her uncertainty. She picked up the thrift store dress and stepped to the ironing board she kept tucked beside the closet. As the steam rose in small white puffs, her hands trembled slightly. She smoothed the fabric slowly, the motion calming but emotional. For years she had done things out of necessity, from raising Drew alone to rebuilding after the divorce. But this decision felt different. This one pressed against her dignity in a way she couldn't ignore. She wanted to stand her ground, yet she also knew how quickly she could lose everything she'd worked for. She lifted the dress and held it against her body. Seeing her reflection in the small mirror leaning on the wall, she looked older than she felt. Lines around her eyes, a furrow in her brow, a tiredness she tried to hide behind a smile. "Who am I kidding?" she whispered to her reflection, but another voice, quieter and unexpected, rose inside her. "You've been alone for so long. It's okay to accept help." Her phone buzzed again. She walked toward it, dress still draped over her arm. This time, the notification was from Daniel's assistant, a short, polite message asking if she had made a decision. Linda stood there for a long moment, the room silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She took a breath, then another. She typed slowly, "I agree." Temporarily, she hesitated, her finger hovering over the send button. Then she pressed it. The reply came almost instantly. Then, "Let's do this with honesty, even if the beginning wasn't." Her breath caught. Honesty? The word lingered in the quiet room, heavier than she expected. What did honesty look like between two strangers pretending to care? The question stayed with her long after she set the phone down. When the foundation's glass doors slid open, Linda felt her ribs tighten. The lobby was bright, airy, and far quieter than she expected. Pale wood floors gleamed beneath soft lighting, and the walls displayed framed photographs of community projects, new playgrounds, restored homes, volunteers handing out food and winter coats. Everything about the space felt intentional, grounded, human. A young receptionist looked up with a warm smile. "You must be Ms. Harris. Mr. Reeves is expecting you." Her stomach flipped. Hearing her name spoken in this office made the whole arrangement feel suddenly real. She nodded and followed the receptionist through a hallway lined with doors that stood slightly ajar, revealing bustling desks, pinned-up calendars, and shelves stacked with binders. It didn't feel like a wealthy man's world. It felt like a place built on purpose. Daniel stepped out of his office before she reached the door. "Linda," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I'm glad you came." She managed a small smile. "I'm trying not to overthink it." "I'm doing the same," he replied with a quiet lift of his brow, easing the tension in her chest. He walked her through the foundation, introducing her to staff members. Each person greeted her kindly, but she sensed a flicker of curiosity behind their eyes. Nothing cruel, just the natural wondering of people suddenly seeing their reserved boss accompanied by someone new. She felt her cheeks warm. Daniel seemed to sense the shift. "Linda's been doing community outreach work for nearly 2 decades. He said to one of the program managers, "Her insight is invaluable." The praise jolted her. He wasn't saying it to impress anyone. His tone was matter-of-fact, respectful. But she felt exposed all the same, unsure how to hold that kind of acknowledgement. They toured a small conference room where staff prepped materials for an after-school tutoring program. Daniel paused to speak with a volunteer who had dropped a stack of folders. He crouched down to help gather them, listening intently as the woman explained a scheduling concern. Linda watched him closely. He wasn't performing. He wasn't aware of being observed. His compassion seemed to exist whether she stood there or not. She realized something. Quietly, this wasn't the world of a distant millionaire. It was one of someone who still carried the weight of other people's needs with a kind of steady devotion. After the tour, Daniel suggested they attend a small community event together, a Saturday program at a neighborhood center just a few miles away. "It's low-key," he said as they walked to his car. "More your territory than mine." "Honestly," she smiled, "I doubt that." "You'd be surprised," he murmured. The community center was housed in an aging brick building with peeling paint and a front yard littered with fallen leaves. But inside, warmth pulsed through every corner. Children sat cross-legged on the floor listening to a story. Parents stood beside tables filled with donated coats. Volunteers handed out warm drinks in styrofoam cups. This was her world, a world where small acts mattered. She moved effortlessly into conversation with a mother looking for winter boots for her son, guiding her toward the right table. Daniel watched, his expression softened by something almost like admiration. "You're good at this," he said quietly when she walked back to him. "It's just what I know," she replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. They were interrupted by a well-dressed man with a donor badge clipped to his blazer. His voice carried a confident sharpness as he approached. "Daniel," the man said with a tight smile. "Didn't expect to see you here today." And his eyes traveled over Linda in a quick assessment. "You brought company." Linda stiffened. She offered a polite nod, but the man turned his attention back to Daniel before she could say anything. "You're expanding your circles," he said. The comment dipped in a tone she recognized too well, one that measured worth by appearance. Daniel's jaw tightened barely enough for her to notice. "Linda works in outreach," he said evenly. "She has more experience in this field than both of us combined." The man chuckled. "If you say so. These events can attract all kinds." Linda felt the words hit as sharply as if he'd flicked them at her. She lowered her gaze, her breath hitching, before she could retreat. Daniel spoke again this time, with a firmness that carried an unmistakable edge. "Watch your tone," he said quietly. The donor blinked. "I didn't mean you did," Daniel interrupted, his voice calm but unyielding. "And I won't pretend otherwise." The man shifted uncomfortably, muttered something about checking on the coat inventory, and walked away. Linda stood frozen, the noise of the room fading beneath the thud of her heartbeat. She wasn't used to anyone stepping between her and disrespect, not anymore. Years of handling conflict on her own had trained her to swallow these moments, smooth them over, move forward silently. But Daniel had intercepted it before she could even react. "Are you all right?" he asked, turning to her. She nodded, though her chest felt strangely tight. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said quietly, "but I wanted to." Something flickered in his expression and concern. Maybe, or protectiveness. But she couldn't read all of it. What she could feel was the warmth settling under her ribs, an unexpected calm pushing back against the sting of the donor's words. She walked with Daniel toward a table of children coloring with broken crayons. Their laughter filled the air, grounding her. But the question lingered, soft and persistent, rising every time she glanced at him. Why did he care this much? The thought followed her all the way back to the foundation doors when the event ended, echoing just beneath her breastbone like a quiet, steady pulse she couldn't ignore. The woman's voice was soft, but the accusation hit like cold water. Linda froze, a plate of untouched appetizers balanced in her hand, as the stranger stepped into her path near the back of the event hall. The room around them buzzed with low conversation and clinking glasses, but her focus narrowed to the woman's steady gaze. "You're Linda," the woman said, not a question, more like an assessment. She was in her mid-50s, elegant in a way that didn't demand attention. Her silver necklace glinted under the warm lights, and her posture was poised with the confidence of someone used to being listened to. Linda's breath slipped shallow. She had never seen this woman before, but something in her eyes, sharp, wounded, already convinced, told her she knew exactly who she was. "I'm Elaine," the woman continued, "Daniel's sister-in-law." The name struck something in Linda's memory. Daniel had mentioned only briefly that his late wife's family still lived nearby, but he had never spoken with detail. Never open that door wider than necessary. Linda swallowed, her fingers tightening against the plate she held. It's nice to meet you. Elaine's gaze didn't soften. She looked Linda up and down with a quiet, measured disapproval. I wanted to introduce myself and to understand what exactly is happening here. Linda felt heat rush up her neck. Her voice stumbled. We're just working together on a few community projects. Elaine stepped closer, lowering her tone but sharpening her words. Daniel is vulnerable. People think he's strong, he is, but the grief hasn't gone anywhere, and he's been alone for a long time. Too long. The implication landed hard. Linda's chest tightened. I would never take advantage of him. Wouldn't you? Elaine asked softly, tilting her head as if she could peer through whatever shield Linda had left. Women have tried before, some subtle, some not. You wouldn't be the first. Linda felt her throat close. You don't know me. No, I don't. Elaine agreed. And Daniel thinks the best of people, especially those who come from difficult circumstances. It makes him want to fix things. Linda tried to breathe through the pressure building in her chest. He's not fixing me? Then what is this? Elaine asked. Because to everyone else in this room, the two of you look like you're something. And Daniel doesn't have the strength for another heartbreak. Linda's pulse throbbed painfully in her ears. She glanced around, but no one seemed to notice the small confrontation unfolding in the corner. I didn't start anything, she whispered. I didn't plan any of this. Elaine stepped even closer, her voice barely above a murmur. Did he tell you he still visits her grave every Sunday morning, rain or snow, as if she just stepped out of the room and might return at any moment? Linda's breath hitched. That wasn't something Daniel had mentioned, not even in the quiet honesty of the bistro. He's loyal, Elaine said. That's who he is. And loyalty makes him blind sometimes. I won't let him be hurt because someone saw an opportunity. The plate in Linda's hand trembled. Appetizers shifted, nearly sliding as she tried to steady herself. I'm not an opportunity, she said, but her voice sounded too thin, too unconvincing even to her own ears. Elaine looked at her a moment longer, then nodded once, as if reaching a verdict she had expected all along. Be careful, Linda, for his sake and for yours. She walked away without waiting for a response. Linda stood frozen in place, her breath shallow, her skin prickling with humiliation. The room felt suddenly too warm, too bright, the conversations around her turning into a blur of indistinct noise. She didn't know where to look, where to stand. Her heart thudded heavily in her chest. She set the plate down on a nearby table with shaking hands. The air tasted sharp, like she wasn't getting enough of it. She needed a moment somewhere hidden, somewhere quiet. She slipped down the hallway toward the restrooms, pushing the door open with a trembling breath. The cool, sterile lighting cast harsh shadows on the tiled floor. She stepped into a stall, closed the door, and sank onto the closed lid of the toilet. The tears came before she could stop them. She pressed her palms to her face, shoulders curling in. Shame pooled in her chest, a deep, familiar ache she hadn't felt this sharply in years. She told herself it wasn't fair, that Elaine didn't know the truth, that she had stepped into this whole arrangement out of necessity, not manipulation. But the sting of being seen as an outsider, an intruder, cut deeper than she expected. And worse, she believed part of it. She was stepping into a story that didn't belong to her, a story that began long before she arrived, one filled with love, loss, and a loyalty she hadn't earned and might never understand. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind raced the lie in the elevator, Daniel's steady kindness, the offer he had made, the glimpses into a world saturated with grief he hadn't shared. What was she doing? Was she helping him, hurting him, fooling herself? She pressed her forehead against her knees, voice barely a whisper. Maybe I should walk away. The thought lingered, frighteningly real. She stayed curled there for a long moment, the restroom silence wrapping around her like cold fabric. Outside, she heard footsteps, voices. Someone laughing, Life continued, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. When she finally lifted her head, her breath was steadier, but her heart felt heavier. If stepping into his world already hurt this much, what would staying cost her? Linda didn't hear Daniel approach. She only saw his shadow stretching beside hers on the grass, long and dark against the fading orange light. The park was almost empty at this hour, the last joggers heading to their cars, the breeze carrying a faint chill that hinted at the end of fall. She had come here to breathe, to recover from the confrontation at the event, to gather the pieces of herself she'd lost in that restroom stall. She didn't turn when his shadow reached her. Something in her chest tightened, not in fear, but in a quiet acknowledgement that she wasn't ready for another conversation and yet needed one all the same. "I figured I might find you here," Daniel said softly. His voice had that calm timbre she was beginning to recognize, the kind that made even the heaviest conversations feel survivable. She kept her gaze on the pond in front of them, where the sunset laid a trembling layer of gold across the water's surface. "I just needed a minute," she murmured. Daniel stepped closer, but left enough space between them to honor whatever boundary she needed. "Elaine talked to you." Linda closed her eyes. His words didn't carry accusation, only fatigue, and maybe a trace of regret. "I'm guessing she talked to you too," she said. He let out a slow breath. "Not yet. But I know her. I know how protective she can be." Linda shook her head, her voice rougher than she intended. "She thinks I'm using you. She thinks I'm taking advantage of your grief." Daniel stood very still. The weight of his silence settled around them like an extra layer of dusk. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, but edged with something more personal than he usually allowed. "My grief is mine," he said. "No one owns it, and no one gets to decide what I'm ready for except me." The words hung there. Linda felt something inside her soften, though the shame still pulsed under her ribs. "She said you visit her grave every Sunday." Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he glanced toward the ground, hands in his pockets. "I do." Linda's throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at her, then really looked. "Because it's not your burden to carry, and because it doesn't define everything about me. Not anymore." Linda pressed her palm to her forehead, rubbing gently as though she could wipe away the sting of Elaine's assumptions. "I shouldn't be in this. I shouldn't be anywhere near something that's sacred." "You're not replacing anything," he said, the firmness in his tone surprising her. "And you're not pretending to be someone you're not. You're helping me navigate a complicated situation. That's all. But it's not all anymore," she whispered. "People are talking, judging, and I don't know what I am in this arrangement." Daniel took a step closer, just enough that she felt his presence ease some of her trembling. "Linda, what happened today shouldn't have fallen on you. I'm sorry." She shook her head. "It's not your fault." "Maybe not," he said, "but I brought you into a story that has loose ends and broken pieces. I should have realized it would touch you too." The pond rippled gently, reflecting the shifting colors of the sky, pink, gold, and a muted violet that seemed to mirror her emotions. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from uncertainty. "You've been carrying grief for so long," she said quietly, "and I don't want to be a placeholder while you figure things out." Daniel exhaled slowly, as if the truth of her words touched a place he rarely allowed anyone to reach. He moved to stand beside her, both of them facing the pond, the horizon drawing a thin line of fading light between sky and water. "No one could ever replace my wife," he said. "I don't want that. I don't expect it. But that doesn't mean my heart can't make room for new things." Linda felt her breath hitch. He continued, voice still soft, but now laced with a vulnerability he hadn't shown before. "For years, I didn't let anyone close. Not because I couldn't. Because I was afraid that moving forward would mean letting go. And that felt like betrayal." She finally turned toward him. His expression wasn't guarded this time. It was open, honest, and touched by a quiet sadness that made her chest ache. And now she asked, "Now," he said, "I'm realizing that holding on to the past doesn't bring her back. It only keeps the present out." Linda swallowed hard. The ache in her chest deepened. "I'm afraid too." "Daniel? What of being a temporary fix?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of being someone you lean on because you can't face things alone, not because you truly want me there." His gaze softened with something warm and unexpectedly tender. "Linda, if I didn't want you there, I wouldn't be standing here." Her breath trembled. "And you're not a placeholder," he added, "not to me." The world around them quieted, the wind stilling, the last birds quieting their songs. It felt like the park itself leaned closer, waiting. Daniel stepped toward her, close enough that she felt the warmth of his presence, but not so close that it felt like a claim. "Stay," he said, his voice low but steady. "Not for the arrangement, not for appearances. Stay because your calm makes my days easier, and because I feel less alone when you're near." Her heart thudded once, hard, then again, softer. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if she had the courage to step forward or the strength to walk away. But she knew this. The ground beneath her felt different with his words lingering in the air, less steady, but somehow more alive. She looked at the pond again, the last line of sunlight slipping below the horizon. Was this the beginning of something real? The question settled quietly in her chest, deeper than anything she had meant to feel when she first told that lie in the elevator. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same stack of files. Neither pulled away. The movement was small, barely a moment, but it lingered in Linda's skin long after they both stepped back, each pretending to focus on the spreadsheet spread across the conference table. A quiet hum from the ceiling vent filled the silence, offering a thin layer of cover neither of them used. Daniel cleared his throat first. "Sorry, I didn't see your hand there." "It's all right," she murmured. Her voice came out softer than she intended. Their eyes met for a second, not long, but long enough. The past week had changed the rhythm between them. They still worked together, still followed their arrangement, but something gentler had slipped into the spaces of their conversations. The edges of formality had rounded. He asked more questions about her son, her work, her favorite books. She learned he preferred old diners to upscale restaurants, that he still wrote letters by hand, that he could find calm in repairing small things, clocks, radios, anything with simple gears and honest mechanics. And now, their hands had touched, lightly, but unmistakably. Daniel set the file aside and gestured toward the door. "Lunch. The weather's nice enough to walk." She nodded, grateful for the interruption to her thoughts. They stepped out into the crisp midday air. Jackets zipped against the lingering fall chill. The sky was pale blue, washed out like an old photograph, and the wind carried the faint smell of leaves beginning to decay. It was the kind of day that made her think of long ago walks with her son when he was little, when years still felt wide open. They reached a small diner tucked between a hardware store and a laundromat. The sign buzzed faintly in the window, and the smell of frying onions drifted into the street before they even opened the door. Inside, the booths were cracked from years of use, and a radio on the shelf played soft country music. The waitress greeted Daniel by name. Linda looked at him with a smile. "So, you're a regular here." His eyes warmed. "I like places that don't try to be more than they are." They slid into a booth. Linda ordered tomato soup and grilled cheese. Daniel ordered the same, smiling when she raised an eyebrow at him. What he said. It seemed like the right kind of day for it. The conversation flowed easily at first, small stories. Gentle humor. She told him about the time she tried to help a group of seniors set up email accounts at the community center, how they ended up chatting more about grandchildren than technology. He shared a memory about getting lost on a farm tour as a boy, only to be found feeding carrots to a horse that had completely ignored the adults calling his name. Their laughter blended, quieter than it might have been with friends, but somehow warmer. Midway through the meal, a moment of silence fell, not heavy, not uncomfortable, just quiet enough that she felt the air shift. She looked up to find Daniel watching her, his gaze not searching, but thoughtful. What she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head lightly. Nothing. It's nice. Being here with you. Her heart lifted and tightened at the same time. It is, she said softly. She couldn't remember the last time a man had spoken to her in a way that felt neither demanding nor dismissive, just sincere, steady. It made the edges of her world feel softer. They walked back slowly, as if neither wanted to return to the structure of the foundation walls too quickly. She caught him looking at her once, his expression quiet but warm, and she pretended not to notice the way her chest fluttered. Later that afternoon, as they reviewed event schedules in his office, another moment slipped between them, unexpected and delicate. She leaned over his desk, her hair falling forward. Before she could tuck it back, his hand lifted. His fingertips brushed a stray strand away from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, almost uncertain, but lightning quick. Daniel froze as soon as he realized what he'd done. His hand stopped mid-air, then withdrew sharply, as if he'd touched something dangerous. "I'm sorry," he said, voice rougher than before. "I shouldn't have." Linda's breath stalled. Her skin buzzed where his fingers had been, warmth blooming beneath the surface. She stepped back, needing space, air, clarity, anything to slow the sudden rush of emotion. "It's fine," she whispered. But it wasn't fine. It meant something, more than either of them had prepared for. She saw the same realization flicker behind his eyes. For the first time, Daniel didn't look like the man who handled everything with gentle composure. He looked unsure, as if he was standing at the edge of something new, something he hadn't expected this late in life. The room felt too still, too intimate. He cleared his throat, turning away slightly. "We should finish going over these schedules." "Yes," she said, though her voice trembled. "We should." They worked in silence for the next few minutes, but neither truly focused. The atmosphere had changed too sharply. Every page turn, every shift of movement seemed amplified. At one point, their eyes met accidentally. Both looked away too fast. When the meeting ended, Linda stepped into the hallway with her pulse fluttering unevenly. Walking toward the elevator, she felt the warmth of that moment cling to her like residue. Was this still an arrangement, or had they quietly stepped into something neither wanted to name? When the elevator doors opened, she hesitated before stepping inside. Her thoughts tangled in a way she hadn't expected. Not at this age, not in this chapter of her life. If they crossed this line, would anything remain simple? The doors slid shut softly, keeping the question suspended in the air with her. The conference room air felt colder than usual when Linda walked in. Maybe it was the blast of the vent overhead, or maybe it was the way every conversation dipped the moment she stepped through the doorway. The long table was already half filled, coffee cups scattered across folders, and a faint smell of dry erase markers hung in the air. Her supervisor, Marcia Turner, stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up like he was about to perform a miracle instead of run a strained nonprofit on its last thread of grants. He gave her a smile that was too sharp to be friendly. "Linda," he said loudly, "glad you're here. We were just talking about our partnership with the Reeves Foundation." A few heads turned, some curious, some calculating. She forced a polite nod and took a seat near the middle. Her heart thudded uncomfortably. Mark had never said partnership before. Up until last month, he barely acknowledged her department existed. He clicked a slide on the projector. "As many of you know, we're expecting new funding opportunities. Big ones. And thanks to Linda's close connection with Daniel Reeves, it's looking promising." The words hit like a slap. A murmur rippled across the room. Someone whispered, "Close connection?" Someone else snorted under their breath. Linda swallowed against the sudden heat in her cheeks. "Mark," she said, voice even. "I haven't confirmed anything." He cut her off with a raised hand. Of course. Nothing official yet. But surely, your relationship gives us an advantage. Relationship." He said it slowly, deliberately, letting the words settle like dust over the table. Linda's stomach knotted. She caught a pair of staffers exchanging looks, the kind she had seen her whole life. The kind that said, "We know what kind of woman you are," without ever needing to speak it aloud. This was the elevator all over again, rumors spreading like cracks through glass. Her name becoming shorthand for something she never intended. Her dignity twisting into a bargaining chip she never agreed to trade. Mark moved on with his presentation, his voice overly bright. With Daniel's influence, we can secure visibility, maybe even sponsor events. "Stop," Linda said quietly. No one heard her. She tried again, louder. "Stop." The room fell silent. Mark blinked, half confused, half irritated. Is there a problem? Linda stood. It felt different than any time she had ever stood in that room, less like an apology, more like a reckoning. Her hands trembled, but her voice, when it came, surprised her with its clarity. "You will not use my name or my connection to Daniel Reeves to leverage funding." She scanned the room, meeting eyes that quickly darted away. "I won't allow it." Mark gave a thin, dismissive smile. "Linda, don't be dramatic. This is how the nonprofit world works. Relationships matter. Access matters. You're in a position to help us all. I'm in a position to do my job," she said, "not to be paraded around as some kind of advantage." Someone shifted uncomfortably. Someone else cleared their throat. The tension grew thick. Mark's face darkened. "You're overreacting." "No," she said, her breath tightening. "I'm reacting exactly the right amount, and I'm telling you to remove my name from this proposal. Now." The room went utterly still. Mark chuckled, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Linda, you're misunderstanding. I'm not," she said, "and I won't be cornered again." She felt the weight of every eye on her, the judgment, the gossip, the unspoken whispers weaving themselves around assumptions about how a woman like her ended up standing beside a man like Daniel. She'd carried worse. She could carry this. Mark pressed his palms onto the table, leaning forward. "You do understand that funding decisions impact your entire department. If you sabotage this, it could cost jobs." Her pulse quickened. He was threatening her subtly, but unmistakably. Linda steadied her breath. "Then find another way to secure funding, one that doesn't rely on insinuations about my personal life." Mark opened his mouth again, but she raised a hand this time, calmly, firmly. "I'm done discussing this." A shifting unease filled the room. Staff members avoided her gaze, some embarrassed for her, others curious. But no one spoke. Linda gathered her notebook, spine straight, and walked toward the door. Her hand touched the handle when a woman near the end of the table whispered, "Not quietly enough, I guess. Being with a millionaire doesn't mean she wants to help anyone else." The words punched through her, small but sharp. She didn't turn, not because she didn't want to, but because she knew that if she did, her face would betray too much. Outside the conference room, she leaned briefly against the wall, drawing in a steadying breath. The corridor felt dimmer than usual. Or maybe she was just tired of defending a truth that had started as a simple lie. Tired of being weighed on scales she never asked to stand upon. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Daniel. "Are you free this evening? There's something I'd like to talk about." She stared at the screen, her breath catching. What would Daniel think when he found out what had happened? About how his name had been weaponized? About the rumors now circling her like vultures? Would he blame himself? Would he step back? Would he question her part in it? The hallway seemed to sway, filled with shadows she couldn't quite shake. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, but the question lingered, heavy and haunting, as she walked toward the exit. Daniel slid a folder toward her. Linda felt her breath catch before she even opened it. They were sitting in his office after hours, the last of the staff gone, the building wrapped in a soft quiet that made everything feel more personal than it should have. A small lamp on his desk cast warm light across the folder, making its edges glow faintly. She didn't reach for it. "What is this, a proposal?" Daniel said gently. "Something I've been working on for a while." She hesitated before resting her hand on the cover. The paper felt heavier than it looked. "For me, yes," he said. "For you." Her pulse thudded in her ears. She opened the folder slowly, the faint scent of ink and paper rising as she parted the pages. At first, the words didn't register. She read them twice before they solidified. A new outreach division, a director position, a full team, a long-term investment. She blinked, stunned. "Daniel, this is real," he finished softly. "A project I've wanted to start for years, but it needed someone who actually understands the community, someone who's been in the field, not just reading reports from a distance." She stared at the proposal, unable to lift her eyes. It wasn't just a promotion. It wasn't just responsibility. It was a doorway into a different life, one she had never imagined would open for her. Certainly not now. Not like this. "You should read the details," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It's a full director role, with a budget, autonomy, a team you can choose. You'd shape the entire program." Her fingers trembled on the page. "Daniel, this is huge." He smiled faintly. "It's deserved." She closed the folder gently, suddenly unable to look at the bold black letters staring up at her. "Why now?" He hesitated, not from doubt, but from the weight of honesty. "Because what happened at your nonprofit today wasn't right, and because you deserve a space where your voice isn't dismissed or exploited." She winced. "You heard." "I did," he said quietly. Someone forwarded the meeting notes. Linda swallowed hard. Shame, anger, and something warmer tangled in her chest. "I didn't want you dragged into that. You weren't the one who dragged me," he said. "They did." The words were steady, protective, dangerously so. She forced herself to exhale slowly. "If I take this job," she murmured, "it ties my entire future to you." He didn't flinch. "Your future wouldn't be tied to me. It would be tied to your work. I would just be the one giving you the space to do it." She finally looked up at him, the soft lamplight catching the quiet sincerity in his face. He wasn't manipulating her. He wasn't dangling opportunity as leverage. He was offering something he believed in, something he believed she could make real. But that didn't erase the fear crawling under her skin. "What will people say?" she whispered. "That you earned it," he said. She let out a shaky laugh, not from humor, but disbelief. "No, Daniel, that's not what they'll say. They'll say I used you, that I got where I am because of me, he finished. Or because I saw your talent." His voice held no ego, no desire to be credited, only quiet frustration on her behalf. She stared at the closed folder, her chest tightening. "I've spent years building what little reputation I have. I can't risk it now." He leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on his knees. "Linda, your reputation was never built on other people's opinions. It was built on the families you helped, the programs you held together with duct tape and stubbornness. That won't change, but it will," she said softly. "People talk. They always have. And this only feeds the story." "What story?" he asked. She looked down. "That I'm using you?" Daniel's jaw tightened in quiet anger, not at her, but for her. "That's not true." "Maybe not," she whispered. "But sometimes truth doesn't matter." Silence thickened the space between them. Not the cold kind, the heavy human kind where two people realized they were standing on the edge of something enormous, and neither was sure what came next. She finally closed the folder, pressing her hand against it. "I can't give you an answer right now." He nodded slowly, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, a small, unguarded hurt that only someone who had lost deeply would try so hard to hide. "Of course," he said gently. "Take all the time you need." She wished he hadn't said it that way. So patient, so steady, so willing to give her space even as she felt herself pulling away and maybe, confusingly, stepping closer at the same time. She stood, needing the air of the hallway. He stood too, out of instinct more than formality. "Linda," he said quietly. She paused in the doorway. This offer isn't because of whatever people think is happening between us. It's because you're the most capable person I've met in this work." He hesitated, then added even softer, "And because I trust you." Trust. The words sank into her like warmth and weight at once. She nodded, unable to say more, and stepped out into the dim hallway. Her footsteps echoed lightly on the polished floor, each one feeling like a step away from certainty and towards something she wasn't ready to name. Was she pulling away or stepping closer with caution? She didn't know, not yet, but the folder in her hand felt like the beginning and the cost of everything that might come. The ballroom lights were too bright, and Linda felt every gaze like heat on her skin. The chandelier overhead glittered with hundreds of crystals, scattering reflections across the polished floor. Voices rose in elegant chatter, glasses clinked, and the gentle hum of a string quartet floated through the air, but none of it eased the pressure tightening in her chest. She stood near the edge of the room, trying to calm her breathing. Daniel was across the hall, speaking with two board members, his posture relaxed but attentive. He looked like he belonged here, calm, poised, gracious. She felt like an unwelcome note in a flawless composition. She smoothed the skirt of her dark blue dress, one she had borrowed from her sister, and tried to steady the tremble in her hands. She wasn't used to evenings like this. She wasn't used to eyes following her with curiosity, some polite, some judgmental, some cold enough to sting. She focused on Daniel. When he looked her way, something in her softened. He offered a small smile, private, encouraging. She took a breath, but then a voice broke through the hum of the room, a voice that instantly shifted the air. Linda Harris. Linda turned. A young woman stood a few feet away, her expression controlled but sharp. She had Daniel's eyes the same shade of blue, though colder. Her hair was pinned in a sleek twist, her dress a striking black that contrasted with her pale skin. She wasn't more than 24, but she carried herself with the authority of someone used to being heard. Linda's breath stilled. Caroline, Daniel's daughter. "Hello," Linda said carefully. Caroline approached, each step deliberate. "I flew in early for the weekend. My father didn't tell me he was bringing anyone tonight." Her voice was even, precise. Linda clasped her hands together. "I didn't know I'd be attending until earlier this week." Caroline's eyes scanned her slowly, assessing. Not with cruelty, but with suspicion, sharpened over years of protecting someone she loved. "And you are involved with him?" The question hit with more force than volume. Several people nearby looked over subtly. "We're working together," Linda answered, keeping her voice low. "Your father offered me a role at the foundation." "That's not what I asked," Caroline said. A flush crept into Linda's cheeks. "I don't want to misrepresent anything." Caroline stepped closer. "Then say it plainly. Are you with him, or are you someone taking advantage of a grieving man who's finally too tired to see he's vulnerable?" The words sliced straight through her. Linda exhaled shakily, the room momentarily blurring at the edges. She forced herself to remain still. "I care about your father's well-being. I would never hurt him." "That's what everyone says," Caroline murmured, looking her over with something between hurt and anger. "My mother has been gone for years, but he still visits her grave. I know what it means when he lets someone close. I know how rare it is, how dangerous." Linda's heart sank. This wasn't spite. It was fear, pain born from love. She could hear it beneath every sharpened word. "I'm not trying to take her place." Caroline's jaw tightened. "No one can." Silence stretched between them, heavy and intimate. Linda swallowed, trying to gather her scattered breath. "I'm not a threat to your family, or to your memories." Caroline's eyes softened for half a second, but only half. Maybe not intentionally. Before Linda could respond, she felt an arm brush gently against her back. Daniel stepped beside her, sensing the tension before a word was spoken. "Caroline," he said quietly. "You're early." Caroline crossed her arms. "You didn't tell me you were bringing someone." I didn't think I needed your permission, he replied gently, but firmly. Her eyes widened in hurt. That's not fair. No, he said softly, but neither is cornering someone you barely know. Caroline stiffened. Dad, I'm trying to protect you. I know, he said, but you're hurting her to do it. Linda took a small step back, not wanting to be the center of a family wound. But Daniel reached subtly behind him, resting his hand near her elbow, not holding, just anchoring her. She doesn't belong here, Caroline whispered, emotion cracking her voice. Not tonight. Not like this. Daniel inhaled slowly, a deep, steadying breath that made the air around them shift. Maybe it's time to accept that I'm allowed to move forward. Linda felt her lungs freeze. Caroline did too. You loved Mom, Caroline said, voice trembling. You said there would never be someone else. I said I didn't know if I'd ever be ready, he corrected softly. But I've been alone for a long time. And it isn't living. Caroline blinked rapidly, struggling to hold composure. So she's replacing Mom. No, Daniel said firmly. No one replaces her, ever. But liking someone new doesn't erase my past, or my love for your mother. Linda felt her throat tighten. She wasn't supposed to hear these words. She wasn't supposed to be in this moment. But she couldn't walk away. And Linda isn't using me, Daniel added. If anything, I might be relying on her more than I realized. Caroline's gaze flicked between them, her confusion raw, unfiltered. Is this real? Daniel didn't look away. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. He reached for Linda's hand, slowly, intentionally, with a tenderness that made her whole body go still, and he intertwined his fingers with hers. Gasps scattered across the nearby guests. Camera flashes subtle, then not so subtle, sparked from the edges of the room. Linda's heart thundered. Caroline stared at their joined hands, her expression fractured into disbelief and hurt. Dad, she whispered. But Daniel didn't let go. He stepped slightly in front of Linda, his stance protective but calm, his hand steady in hers. I'm not hiding this, he said. Not tonight. Linda's knees nearly weakened. The weight of what he'd done publicly undeniably settled into her chest like a storm. Around them, whispers spread like wildfire. Speculation, shock, approval, criticism. Anything could happen next. Would this destroy his reputation? Or, as terrifying as the thought was, would it free them both? Linda gripped his hand a little tighter, unsure if she was holding on or bracing for impact. Daniel's home wasn't a mansion, just a warm house with too many pictures of a life that had ended early. Linda stepped through the front door slowly, her breath catching as she took in the quiet entryway. The hardwood floors were worn in places, softened by years of footsteps. A lamp glowed warmly in the corner, casting amber light across framed photographs lining the hallway walls. She hesitated before moving farther in. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old books comforting, lived in, unlike the cold, polished wealth she half expected. Daniel hung their coats and gestured gently toward the living room. Make yourself comfortable, he said, voice softer than usual. He sounded tired after the gala, though not defeated, just human. Linda walked toward the mantel above the fireplace, her steps slowing as she saw the first photo. Daniel, younger by a decade, his arm around a woman with light brown hair and a laughing smile. His wife, Molly. The next picture showed the two of them on a beach, wind whipping her hair across her face while he tried and failed to hold it back. Another photo of them at a small dinner table, heads close, candles burning down to stubs. A frame of a newborn baby, Caroline nestled against Molly's chest. None of it hurt to see. If anything, it grounded her. These weren't museum pieces of a perfect marriage. They were captured moments of a life that had been real, messy, joyful, brief. Daniel watched her from a few feet away, hands in his pockets. I haven't changed much in here, he said quietly. You don't have to explain, she replied. He shook his head. I want to. She turned toward him. He stood in the doorway like someone unsure of how much space he was allowed to occupy. She recognized that look she had worn it herself too many times in her own life. I kept everything, he continued, because letting go felt like losing her twice. And keeping it all, it was a way of keeping myself from moving on too quickly. Linda stepped closer, her voice low. There's no too quickly after 8 years. He smiled faintly, a sad, appreciative curve of his lips. Caroline doesn't see it that way. She's grieving too, Linda said gently, differently, but deeply. He nodded. She's afraid I'll forget her mother. You won't, she said, and being with someone new doesn't change that. Daniel looked at her with something like gratitude. I'm still learning that. They moved into the kitchen, where he poured her tea and poured himself coffee habits, she realized, likely born long before she entered his life. They sat at the small wooden table by the window. Outside, the yard was quiet, a soft layer of frost forming along the fence. Linda, he said after a moment, his fingers circling the edge of his mug, I never meant for tonight to unfold that way. She shook her head. You were protecting your daughter. And me? I don't know if I protected either of you, he murmured. I may have only made things harder. For who? For all of us. She looked at his hand resting near hers, the veins showing faintly beneath his skin. A strong hand, but tired. Honest, not reaching for her, not assuming. Just there. I wasn't embarrassed, she said softly. Not by you. He looked up, eyes steady on hers. But were you overwhelmed? She exhaled. Yes. By the attention? No, she whispered. By the meaning. He sat back, absorbing that. It meant something to me too. Silence drifted over them, but it wasn't tense. It was the kind of quiet that settles comfortably between two people when neither wants to break it with something small. Linda sipped her tea, warming her hands around the cup. I saw the photos, she said gently. Your life with Molly, your family, this house, it's full of love. It was, he said softly, and then it became full of memories. You don't need to erase them for anyone, she said. His eyes softened. I don't want to erase anything, but I also don't want to live only in what used to be. She looked back toward the living room, where the photographs glowed faintly in the lamplight. She was important to you. She still is. Yes, he said. And so are the things I'm feeling now. Her breath caught. Daniel? He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, his voice low, as if the walls themselves needed gentleness. Linda? I meant what I said at the gala. I'm done hiding. Maybe I should have handled it better. Maybe it wasn't fair to put you in that position. But I wasn't going to pretend. She lowered her gaze to her hands. Her pulse thrummed at her wrists. I don't know what this is yet. I don't either, he admitted. But it's something. I know that much. Her throat tightened. I'm scared of making the wrong choice. I'm scared of becoming dependent on someone again, of losing myself, of stepping into something too big for me. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and rested his fingertips just beside her hand. Not touching, but close enough that warmth passed between them. And I'm scared, he said, of wanting something new when I spent so long convincing myself I didn't deserve it. Her breath hitched. She looked up. He held her gaze with an honesty that stripped away the last of the distance between them. Linda, he whispered, what do you want from me? The question settled around them, gentle and deep, as if the whole house had exhaled with it. She opened her mouth, closed it, because she could answer everything except that. Not yet. Not without breaking something in herself or risking something she wasn't sure she could survive losing. Her silence stretched, trembling. She looked at him, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to say it. He nodded, acceptance soft in his eyes. He didn't push, he didn't retreat. He simply waited. The warmth of the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet glow of a life once full, now opening again, and her heart, caught gently between the past he honored and the future he was asking her to define. What did she want? The answer hovered on the edge of her breath, unfinished, impossible to grasp, yet heavier than anything she'd ever had to say. They walked along the river in the fading light, neither ready to speak first. The late autumn air carried the faint smell of dry leaves, and the water moved slowly, as though even the river understood the need for quiet. Linda kept her hands deep in her coat pockets, not for the cold, but to steady herself. Daniel walked beside her with his shoulders slightly hunched, thoughtful, careful, as though one wrong word might send everything unraveling. The sun dipped low, painting a thin line of gold across the ripples. Linda watched the reflection tremble, unsure if the trembling came from the water or from something unsteady inside her. The silence stretched long enough that it became a presence of its own, not uncomfortable, but expectant. Finally, she stopped walking. Daniel turned to her, his breath visible in the cooling air. "Last night was overwhelming," she said quietly. He nodded. "For me, too." She studied his face in the half-light, the lines near his eyes, the hint of exhaustion mixed with genuine concern. She could see the question he wasn't asking. Before he spoke, she inhaled deeply, letting the river wind brush her cheeks. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about everything, about us, or whatever we are right now." Daniel looked down briefly, his jaw tightening in a way that told her he feared the worst. "I don't want to pretend anymore," she said, her voice steady but soft. He lifted his gaze to hers. "Neither do I," she swallowed, choosing each word with care. The lie? It started something neither of us expected, and maybe it would have been easier if we walked away. But I don't want to walk away. A faint breath left him, not quite a sigh, not quite relief, but something close to both. "I don't want to lose what's growing here," he said. "Not this." Linda shifted her weight, feeling the heaviness in her chest easing little by little. "But if we're going to move forward," she whispered, "I need truth to be the foundation. No assumptions, no obligations, no rescuing me because you feel guilty or lonely." He stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "Linda," he said gently, "I'm not trying to fill a space. I'm trying to open one." Her eyes glistened before she could stop them. "I've spent years shrinking myself so I wouldn't upset anyone. I can't do that again, not even for someone who's been nothing but kind." "You don't have to shrink," he answered, voice low. "Not with me." She looked at him, searching for any trace of uncertainty. Instead, she found something steadier than she expected, a man still grieving, still piecing things together, but choosing honesty over fear. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "So am I," he replied. A small breeze rustled the trees behind them, scattering a few curled leaves across the path. They stood in the quiet, the kind that made even their breathing sound loud. For the first time in years, Linda didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it breathe with them, holding space for the fragile truth settling between them. Daniel's voice softened. "I can't promise everything will be easy." "I'm not asking for easy," she said. "I'm asking for real." He nodded once, a simple but profound gesture. Then, "No more pretending," he said. "From here on, whatever we build, it's because we choose to, not because circumstances pushed us together." Linda felt something loosen inside her chest, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since the day she left her marriage. Truth, not perfection, not performance, just truth. They resumed walking, slower this time. The sky dimmed into a pale lavender, and the street lamps flickered on, one by one, along the trail. Their shadows stretched beside them, long and soft across the pavement. "Daniel," she murmured, her voice almost hesitant, "I want a real chance at this, but I need to move carefully." "I understand." She glanced sideways at him. "Do you—" He met her gaze, steady and open. "I'm not asking you to rush. I'm asking you to stay." Her throat tightened. "Staying is harder for me than leaving." He didn't flinch at the confession. Instead, he slowed to a stop again, turning to face her fully. His breath fogged lightly between them. "If you stay," he said quietly, "you're not staying because I protected you in an elevator. You're not staying because of the gala or the job, or the expectations around us. You're staying because you see something worth staying for. She felt her eyes sting. She blinked slowly, letting the river's soft rushing fill the space between his words. I do, she whispered. He exhaled a shaky, almost disbelieving breath. And then he held still, giving her room, not reaching, not assuming. Linda stepped closer of her own accord. The space between them narrowed. Her fingers slipped from her coat pocket, brushing against the cold air before she reached for him. She hesitated only a second, a single heartbeat where she felt every fear, every history, every quiet longing she'd tried to hide. Then she slid her hand into his. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was simply quiet and sure. Daniel closed his fingers around hers, his touch warm and steady. A silent yes. A beginning that didn't need fireworks to feel profound. For a long moment, they stood side by side, hand in hand, facing the darkening water. A pair of ducks glided across the surface, leaving widening ripples behind them, as if the river itself approved of gentle beginnings. Linda leaned a little closer, not leaning on him, but toward him. He leaned back, mirroring her with a softness she hadn't known she needed. So, he murmured, where do we go from here? She looked out toward the water, where the last sliver of sunlight faded into gray-blue. I don't know, she whispered, but maybe the not knowing is part of it. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. Then we'll figure it out together. The words settled deep inside her, not heavy, not urgent, but warm, healing, still. A question lingered at the edge of her thoughts, subtle but impossible to ignore. What does a new beginning look like for two adults who had already lived whole lifetimes before finding each other? The river flowed on, offering no answer, only the promise of movement. Months later, Linda still kept the thrift store dress, a reminder of the day everything changed. It hung at the back of her closet, pressed and clean, wrapped in its thin plastic cover. She touched it sometimes, not because she planned to wear it again, but because it marked the moment she had finally stepped into her own life, rather than shrinking from it. The morning light filtered through the small kitchen window of her Lakewood home, casting soft squares across the tiled floor. She stood at the counter with a mug of coffee warming her palms. The house didn't feel empty anymore. Even when she was alone, it felt lived in, grounded like a place that belonged to someone who had stopped apologizing for taking up space. Her phone buzzed, a short message from Daniel. Big meeting today. Proud of you. She smiled, the kind of smile that carried a quiet warmth rather than excitement. She typed back, see you tonight. When she arrived at the new community outreach office, the staff greeted her with easy confidence, her confidence. Projects she once thought impossible were now moving forward: the Food Share Network, the Senior Companionship Initiative, the Youth Mentorship Program. Daniel had given her the opportunity, yes, but she had built the momentum herself. Every sunrise brought work that mattered. That afternoon, she stood before a group of volunteers explaining a new neighborhood program. As she spoke, her voice steady and sure, she saw Daniel in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched with a soft pride that made her chest tighten. He had stopped trying to shield her and started walking beside her instead. After the meeting, he waited for her near the reception desk, hands in his coat pockets. You were remarkable in there, he said as she approached. She shrugged lightly. I'm just doing what I care about. No, he said gently. You're creating something lasting. She looked down, touched by the sincerity in his tone. How are things with Caroline? His expression shifted, thoughtful, but not pained. Better, he replied. We've had some honest conversations, hard ones, but good ones. His eyes softened. She's not ready to be all the way in, but she's not all the way out, either. That sounds like progress. It is, he said quietly. Thanks to you. She shook her head. You did that work. Daniel? Not me. He paused, as if weighing something he still wasn't sure how to say. Maybe, but you made it easier to try. They stepped outside together, the late winter air brisk but not biting. The sky stretched wide and pale above them, with thin clouds drifting like soft brushstrokes. They didn't rush to the car. They simply stood near the curb, watching the light flicker against the building's glass panels. Later that evening, they ended up at Daniel's house, not planned, not formal. It had become a place of quiet conversations and slow dinners, where the air smelled faintly of cedar from the old furniture, and the kitchen always held a gentle warmth. Linda wandered into the living room while Daniel finished washing dishes. She paused near the fireplace where a few framed photos sat. His late wife's pictures remained no longer tucked away, but not dominating the room either. Balanced, honest. Daniel joined her, drying his hands with a dish towel. "I've been rearranging things," he said, "trying to make the house feel like it belongs to the man I'm becoming, not just the man I was." She nodded. "It feels good in here." "Real?" He hesitated, set the towel aside, and took a slow breath. "Linda," he said softly, "can we sit for a moment?" They settled on the couch. He faced her, knees angled slightly toward hers. The lamp beside them cast a warm pool of light, turning everything gentle: the room, the shadows, the fear in his eyes. "I've been thinking about us," he began. Her pulse fluttered, but she kept her expression calm. "I have too. I don't want a grand gesture," he said. "I don't want anything that looks like a performance. I just want something true." Linda felt her chest rise slowly, a steady breath guiding her through the weight of the moment. He reached out, careful, giving her every chance to step back. When she didn't, he took her hand. "We don't need a ring or a speech for this part. We just need to decide whether the life we've been building piece by piece is the life we want to keep stepping into." Her fingers curled into his. "It is," she whispered. The words settled between them, more profound than any announcement. A promise spoken without ceremony, only honesty. Daniel exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. "Then I think that's our engagement," he said quietly, almost a murmur, as if naming it too loudly might break the tenderness of the moment. She felt tears rise, but they were soft ones, the kind rooted in gratitude. "I guess it is," she whispered. He smiled in that slow, thoughtful way she had come to love. "You know," he added, his voice unsteady in a warm way, "that lie in the elevator. I'm glad it led me to you." Linda laughed, a quiet, trembling sound. "I'm glad too." They leaned into each other. Not a kiss, not an embrace, just a shared closeness that felt like the safest place in the world. Outside the window, the sky deepened into night, and the faint glow of the porch light cast a gentle halo along the driveway. After a long silence, Linda rested her head on his shoulder. "Do we tell anyone?" she asked softly. "Eventually," Daniel murmured. "But tonight, maybe we just tell ourselves." She nodded, closing her eyes. The future didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt open, like a road stretching ahead, not demanding answers, just asking to be walked. And yet, an unspoken question lingered, almost like a blessing rather than a doubt. How many lives change because two people choose kindness at exactly the right moment? No one could say for sure. But for Linda and Daniel, that quiet moment in an elevator had rewritten the arc of their entire lives. Sometimes, healing begins in the smallest, most unexpected moments: a quiet kindness, a gentle voice, a hand offered when we no longer believe we deserve one. Life has a way of surprising us that way. It doesn't always fix what was broken, but it can show us a different way to hold the pieces. One truth that lingers from this story is that second chances rarely arrive wrapped in certainty. They come disguised as awkward encounters, difficult conversations, or a choice that feels too frightening to make. And yet, when we step toward honesty, toward being seen as we really are, life can open in ways we thought were no longer meant for us. Another quiet reminder is this: love in our later years isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about two people choosing to meet each other where they are, carrying their losses, their history, and still saying, "Let's try." May this story remind you that it's never too late for tenderness, for courage, or for a beginning that finally feels true. Thank you for spending a little of your time With this story, it means more than you know. Your presence here, your willingness to listen and feel alongside these characters, is what keeps this space alive. If the story touched you, even in a small way, a like, share, or subscribe helps us spread more kindness into a world that always needs it. Wishing you warmth, gentleness, and a quiet moment of peace tonight.